Welcome back. I've just been sorting out Ra in the colonist editor, and as you can see now we've got everything set up. He does have quite a few traits because I've tried to make them as accurate to being a robot as possible, so he'll start with Jogger to be that bit faster, Tough because he's supposed to be made of metal. I have removed the intellectual and medical bonuses, but the medical 10 quality wants to go up because he is supposed to be a rescue robot. Again, asexual. Neat, because he's supposed to tidy up after himself. Industrious, because he doesn't want to rest. Desensitized, he doesn't care. And also I am well because, again, robot. I've also given him a jumpsuit because I didn't want him starting out naked. I was tempted to give him a helmet as well, but I think a jumpsuit is fair enough. I've also decided to give him an auxiliary AI for construction and medical because, again, it feels like that it's more of a case of he's had a damaged brain which has made him lose his skill set and his records, but he still has the built-in abilities. So until he gets his skills up, he is going to be quite difficult to do anything. As you can see, he's still got very low yields. His success chances are tiny even with all the bonuses. And I honestly can't remember if the Warforge need to eat. So I know he doesn't need to sleep, but he might need to eat. I did see a hunger rating in here somewhere. And now we've got the space battle to happen. And so I'm going to save, so I don't have to go through all this again in case it crashes. And, well, we'll get on with it, shall we? I've never landed so close to an ancient danger before, never mind two. And it looks like we've got an animatree quite close by as well. I'm liking this. It looks like there's plenty of ruins to explore and deconstruct if needed, and I love these little bits of junk even if we can't actually do anything with them. Look, it looks like there's tons of like cars here, almost like there was an evacuation many years ago. Perhaps when the royal faction arrived and wiped out the more technologically advanced inhabitants. But the rest of the map seems to be quite dull. First things first though, we should start taking advantage of the very fertile patch. It's going to be a bit awkward manoeuvring around the trees, because normally I just cut them down, but let's get some rice in here. We'll probably want maybe a bit of cotton. If I can find it amongst all these extra plants. And the final major crop I really want, since we can't do heel root yet, is actually this one that's I think's from Vanilla Expanded, which is, where are we? Well, give me a moment to find it. Ah, fibre corn. Yes, I've never actually managed to grow this yet, but apparently it gives wood when harvested, which will be a nice alternative to cutting down half the forest around us. I'd almost forgotten about the space battle. For a moment I thought that having to save and then restart the game to get the character editor going had actually interrupted it or something. Nope, here we go. Fingers crossed I don't have any landing directly on me and killing me straight away like I've had in the past. But this does give me opportunity to set manual priorities. Ra, of course, will be doing everything by himself for quite some time, but it's nice to be able to leave him to do it without having to micromanage constantly. To start, I'm just going to make sure he's able to do everything, though this will be tweaked and altered as time goes on. I imagine I'm going to have to keep swapping priorities just to whatever's most urgent at the time. Whilst I'd had planned to keep him out of the way by mining out a small room in the mountain, it looks like we're not going to have that chance. The fire might be useful at clearing out some of these trees that I technically can't cut down, but that's actually landing on our wood stockpile, and we need that because we don't want to cut down trees. Ra seems to do a very heroic attempt to put out the fire, but it was simply too much for him by himself. So instead we focused on removing the wood piles from the area until the AI director was decided to be a little bit kinder and give us some rain. which is a relief because I think this fire was just kept spreading. I could not have stopped it. Ra also had some very near misses as the local ruins were struck down by a bit of debris. A bit frustrating as lost resources, but at least it wasn't a lost Ra. Perhaps more importantly, we were losing time. None of this firefighting was really building any skills, though we were getting quite a few bits of resources dropping down. I suspect we'll have components for days. But no survivors, sadly, and no animals, no equipment. Indeed, to Ra it must have seemed like he was the only survivor of his doomed craft. Finally though, we managed to start sowing amongst the chaos. Yes, it was very risky, but in RimWorld you don't have much time. We're already in summer, so winter will be coming, and even if we don't need food, then animals and guests will. Time and time again though, I was very grateful for this rain. Oh, hopefully it will help the crops and stop us from being burned down to the ground before we even start. I was really beginning to understand how badly a 0 and a stat affected work speed now. Night having fallen by the time the fields were done, it wasn't just the slow work speed, it was the fact that every so often there'd be repeated botches. But thankfully the XP was going up, and hopefully that skill would soon be acceptable, if not fast. However, I'd become so focused on the sewing that I'd forgotten about the other main task I'd set myself to do. There was no storeroom. Ra's very few supplies were going to rot if left outside, so that became the highest priority. The first goal was to remove everything from the rain. It wouldn't stop the deterioration, but it'd slow it. The second would be to decide what the walls would be made out of. Whilst I know many people would have gone for steel, I decided to stick with wood. At the time being, it was the more expendable of the two resources, though it would become increasingly important as time went on. Midway into the second day, it felt like little had been accomplished. Ra's attempts to expand the stockroom painfully slow, but this was actually the best way of doing it. If mistakes happened, the only issue would be a lack of chunks received, and there was plenty of granite on the map for now. There was also the advantage that once this was finished it could be smoothed, and thus provide a very safe way of upgrading the construction skill without the risk of botches and wasting resources. The other thing I decided to do was start removing the corpses. Whilst this was a bit of a vanity project and Ra wasn't really affected by their presence, anyone else passing through the area would be, and that might affect trade. On top of being able to search the corpses for any useful bits of equipment or even trade goods, it just felt like it was something Ra would do. I'd underestimated just how long this would take, however. There was more corpses than I realised, and there was a temptation just to throw them in the sarcophagi, though those would be needed for just resources and easy to obtain blocks. It was disappointing slim pickings too, with the only thing really of note was some smoke leaf joints. They would be useful as trade fodder, but not much else. With the area cleared of organic debris, it was now time to check out our ruins and start making a plan of what we were going to build. First things first, deconstructing the more damaged areas and the more useless items about, just to give us more building materials. In spite of having to work 3 days straight with no rest, Repair and Rescue's very low expectations meant that his mood was still high. The rich forests around our little camp keeping him in high spirits as well, though the more we damaged the trees, the worse that debuff was going to become. He'd already maxed out uncomfortable. I thought that was going to be much worse, to be honest, but I see this being a major problem as development continues though. And now it seems that we have our first willing guests, though right now I'm going to refuse them. We don't really have the capability to host anyone, and I suspect it will be that way for some time. Our food resources only consist of survival meals, and one of those was stolen by a sneaky raccoon, the little bugger having snuck in whilst I was mining. But beds are needed. Actually, just a room is needed. But thankfully, deconstruction is going nice and quick. As a nice added bonus, it seems like deconstructing the various objects is also enhancing the construction skill. I'm quite pleased at that because, again, I feel like we're not building our skills up quickly enough. In order to minimise time loss, Ra is going to be moving everything around that central structure, taking advantage of the slate floor that's already there. We probably have enough slate left over from when we're finished deconstructing the various objects to fill in the patches and thus have a nice basic room which will look pretty decent. Whilst I've been trying to move away from superstructure designs, in this case it will be the most efficient, since we can't really expand without cutting down lots of trees and making Ra very unhappy. Using this slated area, which already wasn't going to have anything growing on it, will help minimise the amount of damage we have to do around us. Still, I know how likely I am to mess up some measurements, so I don't expect this base to be pretty neat or beautiful. In fact, I'd just be happy with functional and secure. Yeah, having a break from RimWorld has really taken its toll on my design. As morning dawns, with the floor nearly complete, Ra decides to reward himself with a nice little walk around the area. It's been amusing seeing all the different types of recreation he's been indulging in, from cloud watching, star watching, walks, playing with the horseshoes. I honestly thought he would just go with the recreational games, but he seems to be enjoying his variation. As night falls, it took me a moment to realise why he had a sudden mood drop. It seems that he'd picked up the Hyperweed broad wrap from earlier, and deciding to wear it. Well, it's a shame he wears such tattered things. I'm probably going to have to get round to altering the clothing rules at some point, but for now, I'll just let him have the extra protection. Now, in an act that I'll probably regret later, I need easily accessible slate. With much of the surrounding area granite, slate's actually not that easy to come by here, so I'm going to have to tear up these tiles which I'm not using. It's frustrating because I'd like to keep this area clear of trees, and hopefully it won't bite me in the ass too much later. And it's pretty much the same choice with this limestone wall. I would like to keep it, it makes an excellent temporary defensive wall, but I need the resources, I need the stone, otherwise we're going to be spending a long time watching me cut stone, and I don't want to sit through that, you do not want to sit through that, and I don't think we'll have the time to do that. It'll be winter by the time we have enough stone to actually make anything. With this thought in my mind, I also realised I needed more plant growing skills, so we're going to do another little vanity project and start sowing some flowers around the graves. Not just pretty, but it's also practical. It gets us more of those precious skill points we need, and if I can make it the right size, later on I might even put some bees here. But as if to spite his very efforts, just as he was finished, a cold snap occurred. If we were any other colony, this could have been fatal, especially with our dislike of eating meat. But thankfully we don't have to eat. I mean, it's frustrating, but well, we better focus on actually having a home. At least that's what I thought to begin with. Then I realised the other issue that had occurred. It was going to kill all of our cotton and our fibre corn, our more important crops that were going to be supporting the growth of our colony and also the health of our colony. Frustratingly, I realised this just after I finished making everything out of wood. So, with no time to lose, we didn't have time to be wasting wood on terrible, poor quality seats. And also, while we had wood in stock, it was time to get a research desk built before I forgot. It wasn't something that I'd usually forget about, but given how long everything was taken, and how much micromanagement I had to do with the time and the various little disasters in the beginning of this colony, I was finding myself becoming somewhat overwhelmed in needing to do everything at once. I also had to remember that Ra needed breaks as well. It was tempting to just keep pushing him on, but sooner or later he'd mentally break and then we'd have a massive problem on our hands. It was in the midst of all this our first raid appeared, a hostile peasant from a nearby kingdom. Under-equipped but reasonably competent, he would have made a nice addition to the colony. But we didn't have room for a friendly person, never mind a hostile captive. That's if we survived his attack at all. Ra had the advantage in technology, but if he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, then it was anyone's guess who was going to win. With the initial volleys a mixed success, Ra managed to slip away from his attacker, taking advantage of his fast legs, but also trying not to get too far ahead that his attacker would decide to instead attack the undefended items around the base. Thankfully only one more volley was needed to put her down. Then all that followed was to strip her body of her various items and then clumsily bludgeon her to death. But we weren't savages here. She'd be buried shortly after her death. Well, at least until we researched dissection. In that case she would have been far more useful as a way of gaining more medical knowledge.